So each month we'll be hosting a live conversation so that you can meet one of our resident experts, get advice and ask your most pressing questions. So before we get started and I introduce you to Dr. Stephen Shaw, I wanted to go over the format for today's session. So if any of you have any questions or comments during today's webinar, we would love to hear from you. Please type them in the chat and we will do our very best to answer them today. If we don't get a chance to answer your questions today, we will post the answers on our Facebook page. So please be sure to check and stay in touch because we'll absolutely answer them. No worries there. It just might get a bit busy. So please check our Facebook page. In addition, you can use your emojis to let us know how you're feeling. We would appreciate it if you can keep yourselves muted so that we don't get any background noise. Okay, so let's get started. It'd be great to know a little bit more about our lovely audience who are here. So we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So if we can get a show of hands for anyone who is an autism parent or a caregiver here, you can go ahead and click the yes button in the chat or give us a thumbs up. So we'll wait for you to just pop into the chat box and let us know. Okay, thank you so much. And maybe we have some educators or advocates here. So if you'd like to give us a thumbs up or a yes in the chat box, that would be great. Okay, so who is looking forward to meeting this amazing human being, Mr. Stephen Shaw? So without further ado, I will hand you over to our founder and the all-round amazing human being, Dr. Stephen Shaw. Good morning, Stephen. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's a pleasure being with you today, and it's a pleasure to talk about autism.
Great stuff, great stuff. Stephen, would you mind starting by telling us a bit about yourself, just for anybody who's heard about you but hasn't heard from you before?
All right, well, just very briefly, I was struck with the regressive autism bomb at 18 months, where I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in brief became a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days that it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, my parents were told to send me off to an institution. Fortunately, my parents, like so many parents today who are viewing this video, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that my parents implemented what we today would call an intensive home-based early intervention program. And it was with this program that my parents were able to reach out to me, get me involved with them, the environment, speech returned. And as we fast forward to today, I now spend my time as one being a professor of special education at Adelphi University, teaching mostly courses on autism, researching into this subject, giving presentations around the world about a different country about once a month. I've got 51 countries down so far that I've been to talking about autism, and giving music lessons to children on the autism spectrum, as well as writing books and articles on the subject.
Amazing, Stephen. Thank you for sharing that with us. You're a very, very busy man, it seems, and you do an incredible job with such a varied career. So, Stephen, on to Learn Autism. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your latest project. So Learn Autism was developed to help parents and caregivers learn more. Why do you feel that that's so important, Stephen?
Oh, it is so important for parents to know about autism because parents spend more time with their children than anybody else. Therapists, educators, doctors, various support people. It all starts with the parents. And that is that is what happened with me. I am where I am because of what my parents did for me in what we today would call early intervention.
Great, great. So, Stephen, tell us what's up next for Learn Autism. What can we expect to see in the coming 6 to 12 months for our Learn Autism subscribers?
Well, I'm very excited about the work that we're doing here for Learn Autism as we continue to add new resources and videos, primarily for parents and caretakers. And the key thing about these videos and resources is they're in bite-sized pieces, so just a few minutes long for each one, and they provide research-based yet practical solutions for the challenges that we all face in supporting autistic individuals. Ultimately, I want to see us becoming the go-to guide for resources related to autism. Other things that I see is bringing unbiased information to the field. So we focus on well thought out approaches for working with individuals on the autism spectrum. Just a few of them that we're going to be looking at include applied behavior analysis, TEACH, the Miller method, daily life therapy, floor time, relational development intervention, CERTs, and some others that have been well thought out and have been shown to support children and adults on the autism spectrum. So we want to make it easier for you to make informed and educated choices and decisions for your family. When you know more, you can do more.
Absolutely, that's so true. Thank you, Stephen. That's really exciting. So watch this space, everybody. So there'll be some new informative videos coming and being added to the platform very soon. Okay, Stephen. So just to warm you up, we thought it would be a great idea to have a very quick fire round. Are you okay with that, Stephen? Just a few questions, just to, I know you've had a few meetings already this morning, but just to get you warmed up with, for the burning questions that everyone has for you. So you ready for a little quick fire round?
Bring them on.
Excellent. Okay, right. Are you ready? So remember, these are quick fire questions, so you haven't got much time to think about them. First thing that comes into your head. Okay?
Sure.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. What's your favorite food?
Seafood.
Oh, mittens or gloves?
Gloves.
Favorite place to vacation?
It depends on my mood.
Oh, okay. Let's give you 2. We'll give you 2.
Okay. Alaska and Russia.
Very good. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
I think I know the answer to that one. Yeah. Favorite subject in school?
Music.
And autistic or person with autism?
I am an autistic person.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for being such a good sport.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Okay. So now we'll move on to our audience questions. So the questions that we've had that have been sent in. So thank you everybody for sending in your questions. We will try and get through as many of them as we possibly can. And I will start with the first question here from Rachel. So hi Rachel, nice to see you, and I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for sending in your question, much appreciated. So Stephen, I'm going to read this question out from Rachel, and hopefully you'll be able to give her a little bit of advice or some advice. Rachel's daughter is 14 years old. She was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. She did ABA at many different schools in lots of different countries. And she is a fast learner and has got a high skill level, but she has a food disorder. She is never full and eats very quickly. Do you have any tips on how she can slow down a bit with her eating habit?
All right, well, there's a lot of things that come to mind. And this is what I can discuss because I need to know a lot more information to
Sure.
make specific recommendations.
Yeah.
But never full, eats fast. One thing I would wonder is whether she has some sensory issues, and in particular with the sense known as interoception. Interoception is what informs us about our inner bodily states. Interoception is what tells us when we're full. It also tells us when, for example, we have to go to the bathroom or when we have an upset stomach. So I would seek a qualified occupational therapist. As for eating, it may be a matter of providing her with proper portions of food. So instead of having all the food out on the table that maybe she can grab, provide a plate or plates of food, however food happens to be served to her, with a certain amount, a reasonable amount. Eating fast, maybe there's some protocols. Maybe you chew your food 50 times. Maybe you put your food in your mouth using a fork, and then you put the fork down. And then you pick it up again for the next bite. And these are things that can be communicated to the child in the best way that they communicate. So for the child who speaks well, like we're talking now, and uses verbal communication, spoken word to communicate, we can talk about it. For those children or individuals who use other ways of communicating, using pictures or assistive communication devices, this is exactly how we should communicate. So that's what comes to mind for now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Stephen. That's these are really great suggestions. Obviously, not knowing Rachel's daughter in person, and I hope that helps, Rachel. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so on to the next question from Trisha. Trisha has a son who is 4 years old and has been diagnosed with high-functioning autism, with key challenges in the areas of language and communication. Other visible traits are fears of heights, including playing with swings, as well as lifts or elevators. He also sings the same songs repeatedly and has repeat play patterns. This little boy has a younger brother who's just 8 months old. Whenever his younger brother cries or gets cranky, the big brother gets irritated and tries to hit him, often trying to harm him. We have been lucky so far to stop and defend him, says Trisha, but we are worried about what's going to happen next. So they're asking what can they do to help? And he was recently diagnosed with autism, and he is scheduled for occupational therapy and speech language pathology in the coming weeks. What do you think, Stephen?
All right. Well, there's many challenges expressed here. So let's take a look at least some of them, anyways. So with the challenges in language and communication, first thing I would want to make sure is that this 4-year-old has a reliable means of communication. So while he may be challenged to use spoken word, maybe it would be easier for him to point at pictures or to use an assistive communication device, using Prolo-Quo-to-Go, for example, or maybe typing on a keyboard. It depends where he is developmentally. And these are things to be discussed with the speech-language therapist, working with the speech-language therapist to address these questions. I also noted that he sings same songs repeatedly and has repeated play patterns. So thinking about the same songs, it makes me think that music speaks to him in some way. And what I found in giving music lessons to autistic children is that whatever seems to interfere or affect the speech patterns in the brain in autism tends to leave the musical ones intact. So perhaps one way to teach this child is to teach through song, using songs and singing. And singing might be a good way to communicate as well. I had a student where all our communications were sung. And I know that Janelle, who is with us at Learn Autism, she uses a lot of music in the work that she does. And I see it working very well for her students. So other things that come to mind, fear of heights, fear of play swings, elevators, lifts, and that combined with him having difficulty when his younger sibling cries. And that makes me wonder if there's some sort of vestibular or audio sensory issue, hypersensitivity to be specific. And that's common for people who are hyper or oversensitive in the vestibular sense, which helps us keep our balance, and also the auditory sense, which has to do with hearing. And these are things to explore further with the occupational therapist.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great, and that's hopefully you'll Tricia, you'll be able to take those Stephen's advice and maybe suggestions to your scheduled OT and SLP appointments in the coming weeks. Hopefully they'll point you in the right direction, and that's some great talking points. Just touching on that, actually, Stephen was mentioning music therapy, and that's going to be playing a big part in our next set of videos that are going to be launched. So we're very, very excited about that, and yeah, please watch the space on that, because it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so Stephen, are you ready for the next question?
I'm ready.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so this is from Louise, and she's asking, how do you tell your child they have autism?
Well, it's very important that a child understands what it means to them to be autistic. And what I've found is that most people on the spectrum aren't told that they are autistic. I was lucky in this regard because my parents used the word autism in the house for as long as I can remember. So that means by about age 5 or so, after my speech had pretty much normalized, I knew I had this thing called autism. We didn't know much about what it was, but it helped explain a lot of differences. And for telling a child who doesn't know, I believe it starts with this 4-step process that I've developed for doing this very thing. So this 4-step process starts with discussing, becoming aware of one's characteristics, talking about communicating with the child. Again, it could be with spoken word like we're doing now, it could be with an assistive communication device, but making sure the child is aware of what their strengths are. When I was found at age 4 taking apart watches, my parents made a big deal about letting me know that I was really good in this area, taking apart watches. But at the same time, you also have to be realistic about the challenges and talk about things that may be difficult, whether it's penmanship, maybe waiting, or whatever it might be. After the child becomes familiar with their characteristics, it's time to start lining them up. And that's step 2, lining them up. And a helpful way to do that would be to put 2 columns on a piece of paper. You've got strengths on one side, and you've got challenges on the other. And after listing these strengths and challenges, let's look for strengths that can accommodate for a challenge. So for the student who has difficulty with the physical act of penmanship, but happens to be good on the computer, maybe typing things out using a keyboard will work much faster than writing by hand. And you also might notice that I've used the word challenge and not weakness, because weakness is too static a word. It's got negative connotations, whereas challenge suggests that this is something that you can work with, around, over, through, or even make a considered decision to just not address that challenge. So for example, I am pretty low functioning in noisy bars. Now I know that there are strategies I could engage in, interventions. Maybe I could take magnesium to help with hearing sensitivities. I could wear ear protection. I could learn more about nonverbal communication. Or I could just decide I can lead a fulfilling and productive life, just not addressing this issue and focusing on areas that are productive for me. Well, then we've got the third step. And that third step is what I call non-judgmental comparison. Taking note of others this child knows, parents, friends, and looking at their strengths and also considering their challenges. I also might bring in a few role models, such as many people think Bill Gates is autistic, and he seemed to do okay with his computer business. And as many present and historical figures who we either know that they're on the spectrum or we suspect that they could have been diagnosed, but since it may have been hundreds or thousands of years ago, we have no way to go back and diagnose, but it's still interesting to look at. And then before getting to stage 4, talk about scientists and doctors who study people's characteristics. And it so happens to be that your set of characteristics line up with what is known as autism. And in that way, the person is now comfortable with who they are, what their characteristics mean to them, and how they can work with their characteristics. And the label, it just becomes a convenient, you might say, carrying case or a package in which to summarize the situation. Often I find that disclosure is done absolutely backwards, where the diagnosis or the label is presented first, and then there's a lot of fear and anxiety about it, and then a lot of work needs to be done to undo that fear and anxiety.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. It sounds like your parents just were very, very much celebrating your strengths, and they really chose to focus on those, which I think is obviously it's just left a very, very positive effect on you. So that's great advice. Thank you. Right. Okay. Ready for another one, Stephen?
I'm ready.
Okay. Here we go. So this is from Eric. Thank you, Eric, for your question. What does it feel like to have autism so I can help understand my child better? So Eric would like to understand more about maybe the feelings and you know, how it feels to have autism. I'm sure that that's probably quite difficult to put into words, Stephen, but maybe you might be able to give us an insight.
Well, I've got some ideas to discuss, and also it's important to realize that there's huge diversity in the autism spectrum. So what I say may not hold true for others on the spectrum. And while I am a representative of the autism spectrum, I don't necessarily represent everybody on the autism spectrum. So here are some things that I think perhaps are pretty common for us autistic people. I like to think of autism as a non-standard way of perceiving and processing information from the environment. And as we consider, for example, sensory issues, everybody on the spectrum I know has sensory challenges. Although there is one person I know on the spectrum who says he doesn't have sensory issues, but I also wonder why the shades are down and the lights are off in his house. So what this translates to is that for some sensory input, we can think of perhaps the intensity or the volume being turned up way too high, maybe 100 or 1,000 times higher than what most people experience. And there may be other channels of sensory input that are too low, and we're not receiving enough information. Commonly, the information that we receive tends to be distorted. So distorted sensory input is one thing to consider. Another challenge that we commonly face is perceiving and processing nonverbal communication. Research suggests that the nonverbal component of interaction is up to 93%, which means that autistic people may be receiving only as little as 7%, which is just words, or however the person may communicate. So challenges with perceiving nonverbal communication is one, and nonverbal communication is so important because that's what informs us how people may be feeling, whether someone's telling a joke, using sarcasm, or engaging in an idiom. So these are two areas that are common. The third area is that we tend to have a very widely varying skill set, which translates to the things that we're good at, we can be incredibly good at, but the challenges we have can also be pretty significant and need a lot of support. And I've known a number of autistic people who may be confused by that and often ask themselves, if I can be so good at this, why is this other thing so difficult? So that's what comes to mind at this time.
That's great, Stephen. Thank you for sharing that and putting it so eloquently as well. It's a very, very interesting topic, and we hope to hear more from you about that in some of the upcoming videos. Okay, so actually leading on from that, there's a great question here from Lena. What's the best thing about having autism?
The best thing about being autistic is the unique way that we perceive the environment. Mm-hmm. So I enjoy hearing what I hear, seeing patterns that perhaps other people don't notice, and noticing connections that other people may not notice because we see things differently.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we've got a few more questions coming in.
Right.
I'll just scroll through these and see how we can link them together. Stephen, we've got a question from Jose. What is the best way that he and his what's the best way that he can advocate for his child? Could you give us some suggestions, please?
Yeah, well, some things that come to mind are to know where your child's strengths and challenges are, and to work towards navigating to spending more time in those areas of strengths. Now, there's certainly going to be challenges because that's part of autism as well. So it's a matter of understanding what accommodations and strategies and compensatory behaviors that a person can engage in to address those particular challenges. So for example, one thing that autism means to me is that I have a sensitivity to recessed lighting fixtures. Being under a recessed lighting fixture for me is probably like looking into a spotlight for most other people. And that relates to this very hat. Many of you may think that this hat's a fashion statement, and I guess it is. And it's always good to learn autism. However, it's really an accommodation, and this is the accommodation. It keeps the light from above from what feels to me is like piercing my eyes. So how does that play into advocacy? Well, let us suppose I need to be in a situation with his recessed lighting fixtures. Perhaps it's in school. And then parents should advocate for their child to be able to wear a hat, get support from an occupational therapist who can make this recommendation because they understand sensory issues. And that has to be written into the child's IEP. So even if there's a rule in school that says no hats allowed, if this is something that's written into an IEP as an accommodation, then your child will be able to wear a hat.
Thanks, Stephen. That's a great suggestion, actually. So it's all about identifying challenges that a particular person has, and then advocating on their behalf to support them. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, so we've had a question in from Jude. You are a music therapy advocate. How do you think it benefits children on the autism spectrum?
Well, music is a great way to communicate. Whatever scrambles the speech centers of the brain seems to leave the musical ones intact. And there's something about the predictability of music, the rhythm, melody, and other elements of music that can be very satisfying for the autistic person who craves predictability. At the same time, there's a lot of flexibility within music to be creative and to expand one's understanding of the world. And in particular, seeing music therapists at work, I think their strategy of getting into that child's world, bonding with the child, and using whatever that child does to improvise a way to connect with that child using music is an amazing thing to see.
Great, thank you so much. Connection, I think, is so important there, Stephen. I think you've highlighted a really good point. And if you can connect on, a level where you both have an interest, then it just goes to show it can lead to good things and to a positive outcome. Right, Stephen, we have another question. Can an autistic person live a productive life? I think I'm asking the expert on that here.
Well, I've seen many autistic people lead a productive and fulfilling life. We can think about Temple Grandin, who's probably the most famous autistic person in the world. And she is productive because she engages in her special interest, although I'd rather call it a passion or deep interest, in humane cattle processing. So as a result, she's become a worldwide expert in this subject, and she's better known in the cattle handling industry than she is in the autism world. And many other examples. Myself, I have a particular interest in autism, and that's been parlayed to being a professor of special education, developing an autism certificate program, working on projects such as Learn Autism, and it also interplays with my other interest of flying on airplanes. As at least before the pandemic and then after the pandemic lifts, I'll be able to fly around and travel to other countries, which is something I really like to do as well. As we think about using those interests to lead a fulfilling and productive life and skills, this is something that can be used or employed throughout the spectrum. And what I mean by that is that I know of a fellow in Florida who is pretty significantly affected. He speaks a few words, but generally uses assistive communication devices. He also needs support in terms of managing his day and his schedule and getting him from one place to the next. However, one thing he really likes to do is fold freshly laundered clothes. He likes nothing more than to pull laundry out of a hot dryer and fold them perfectly. I know many people who would like help with their laundry, and he'd love to come and help you too. However, you'd have to pay him to do it because that is his job. And he spends all day in a hot laundromat, pulling hot laundry out of a dryer, folding the laundry faster and better than anybody else. He's fulfilled, he's productive, and society appreciates what he can contribute.
That's great, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those positive stories. So what about your deep interest, Stephen? We hear that you're very interested in bicycles.
Oh, certainly, yes. I started becoming interested in bicycles, I would say at about probably around age 8. And I got it to a point where I could take a bicycle apart down to the ball bearings and put it back together again. And similarly to like what I did with watches at age 4, uh, maybe this is something that I could parlay into employment. And that's exactly what I did. Uh, it was a great way to earn money. I remember spending probably about a month or two in my first formal job. And what I mean by that is you put in your hours and you get a paycheck every couple of weeks. However, it was in a busy restaurant, which didn't go well with my sensory issues, and uh, way too much social interaction. Was noisy, and also was kind of boring cleaning tables all day, which made me realize that I needed to do something that related to my interests. So what I did is I got on my bicycle that I built from the ground up. And I made my rounds of all of the bicycle shops in the area, about a dozen of them. I'd go in, locate the manager, and then start nerding into my bicycle with the manager. And after a period of time, I'd ask him for a job. It took about 11 times, but on the 12th try, I got a job fixing bicycles, where I could now monitor my sensory input by working in the back of the store where it was pretty quiet, or I could come to the front of the store and perseverate on bicycles to people who walked in, although I think the supervisor called that selling bicycles.
That's great, Stephen. I think that obviously that first career suited you, and it's probably very helpful for the people that were coming in and wanting to buy bicycles. Nice, a lot of passion there in your selling, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so Stephen, we are running out of time, so I just wanted to ask you one last question. This is coming from Brad. Can you tell us a bit more about your upbringing and how your parents navigated your formative years?
Oh, sure. So it was going back to age 2.5 when my parents refuted the professional's recommendations for institutionalization and then convincing the school to take me in about a year. That is when my parents implemented what we would today call an intensive home-based early intervention program. And it was a program emphasizing music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. And that's just today's terminology, because in those days, even the concept of early intervention didn't even exist. If we have to compare it to one of the more well-known approaches that we're going to look into much further and provide a lot more information about with Learn Autism, it probably looked like one of the more developmental approaches we have, such as the developmental cognitive approach of the Miller method, or the developmental relationship approach of floor time, or of relational development intervention, and also parts of daily life therapy as practiced at the Boston Higashi School. And I think what my parents did, probably without consciously realizing, is that they just provided for what I needed. They matched practice, actually making it up on their own because this stuff wasn't there, matching practice to my individual needs. And that's one thing that we're focusing on with Learn Autism is what can we do to match reasoned practice to individual needs? The autism spectrum is so wide and it's so diverse that it only makes sense that different approaches are going to work for different individuals. So getting back to my parents, what did they do? Well, first they tried to get me to imitate them, and that didn't work. Something about the mirror neurons, a difference in mirror neurons, that make it difficult for us to imitate, especially at a younger age. So then my parents flipped it around and they imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment because they met me where I was, and they focused on building a bond first, a trusting relationship. And only when you have that can you then build on to it, teaching whatever needs to be taught. And my parents got me to a point where speech started to return at age 4. And I remember all through grade school, while I was a social and academic catastrophe in grade school, uh, things were much better at home in terms of learning. And I remember as I was interested in astronomy or the weather or chemistry or collecting seashells, whatever it was, it always seemed to me that my parents were suddenly interested in that as well. And we'd learn together about the particular subject. So my parents were involved in my education and did a form of, you might say, informal homeschooling. So these are some of the things that my parents did.
Thanks, Stephen. It sounds, again, like your parents were so in tune with you and really going along with, what your interests and your focuses were. So I think it's a great example of how important it is for parents, as we've mentioned before, that they are, with the child, with the person on their journey, and there to support and to lift them up. Okay, thank you so much, Stephen. That's great. Have you any final thoughts for us today?
Yeah, well, a couple of things that do come to mind. One is the potential of autistic individuals is just like with everybody else, it's unlimited. And our goal at Learn Autism is to provide ways to access that potential. A second thing that comes to mind is that given the wide diversity of the autism spectrum, when you've met one autistic individual, you've met one autistic individual.
So true. So very, very true. Thank you, Stephen, for those wise words. And thank you so much for answering all of our questions this morning. It's been absolutely wonderful to have you with us. And sadly, we've run out of time. So thank you so much for joining us today, to all of our audience there. Please don't forget that we will be hosting another live webinar next month. Please watch this space for details, and maybe you can drop us a note, drop us a line, and let us know which one of our experts that you'd like to meet next. They're all on our website, learnautism.com, and you'll also see them featured in our video. So please get in touch and let us know who you would like to see next on the live webinar. Don't forget, any questions that we didn't cover today, we'll be sure to post the answers on our Facebook page as soon as we possibly can. Take care of each other and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Have a great day.
You too.